June 22, 1941. The world watched in stunned disbelief as over 3 million German soldiers launched a surprise invasion into the Soviet Union. This operation, codenamed Barbarossa, was the largest military assault in human history. Adolf Hitler, confident in his own invincibility, believed this campaign would bring a swift and decisive end to Soviet power. He expected to conquer vast territory, destroy communism, and secure the resources Germany needed to dominate Europe forever. But this wasn't just a military gamble. It was an ideological crusade. Fueled by deep hatred, racial supremacy, and a gross underestimation of his enemy, Hitler's ambition turned into a catastrophic mistake. In this episode of History in Under 15 Minutes, we dissect Operation Barbarossa, the campaign that marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's downfall. The road to Barbarossa. By mid-1941, Hitler stood at the peak of his power. Western Europe had fallen like dominoes. Poland was crushed in weeks. France had surrendered in 6 weeks, and the Low Countries were occupied. Britain stood defiant but isolated, holding out largely thanks to its naval superiority and the heroics of the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain. But Hitler's ultimate obsession wasn't in the West. It was in the East. Since the 1920s, he had been clear in his writing and speeches. Germany's future lay in conquering vast lands in Eastern Europe, a concept he called Lebensraum, or living space. Hitler saw the Slavic peoples as racially inferior, the Soviet state as a Judeo-Bolshevik threat, and Stalin's Russia as a rotten regime waiting to collapse. In 1939, Hitler had shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with Joseph Stalin, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which temporarily divided Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and the USSR. But this was always a smokescreen. Hitler viewed the pact as a strategic pause, a chance to eliminate Western opposition before turning eastward. As the Blitzkrieg rolled across Europe, Hitler's confidence grew. Victory seemed inevitable. In his mind, the Red Army would be no match for Germany's modern mechanized forces. He dismissed Soviet tanks as primitive, their leadership as purged and paralyzed, and their people as demoralized. He was wrong, fatally wrong. The strategic setup Operation Barbarossa was an unprecedented logistical and military endeavor. Germany mobilized over 3 million soldiers, 600,000 vehicles, and 4,000 aircraft. The front stretched nearly 1,800 miles, from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The plan was divided into 3 main prongs. Army Group North would move through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. Army Group Center would drive straight for Moscow. Army Group South would advance into Ukraine, targeting Kiev and the valuable resources of the Donbass. The goal? Collapse the Soviet Union in a single, overwhelming campaign. Hitler believed the war would be over in 10 to 12 weeks. And initially, the plan seemed to work. The Red Army, caught off guard, suffered devastating losses. Entire Soviet divisions were encircled and destroyed. In just the first few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were killed or captured. German tanks advanced rapidly, up to 50 kilometers a day. Smolensk, Minsk, and Kiev fell in succession. Stalin, stunned and reeling, issued his now famous order number, 227, not a step back. But the Soviets didn't collapse. Instead, they began to adapt. The fatal delay: Moscow or Ukraine? By late August, the road to Moscow appeared open. Many German generals, including the famed Heinz Guderian, urged Hitler to strike directly at the Soviet capital. Capturing Moscow, they argued, would deal a psychological and logistical death blow to the USSR. But Hitler hesitated. Obsessed with seizing economic resources, he diverted key panzer divisions south toward Kiev. The result was another massive encirclement. Over 600,000 Soviet troops were captured in Ukraine. It was one of the largest military defeats in history. Yet the victory came at a cost. The delay of over a month meant that the final push toward Moscow would now happen in autumn, not summer. The German timetable, so essential to Blitzkrieg's success, was shattered. As October arrived, the roads turned to mud in the Rasputitsa, the seasonal slush that immobilized vehicles and clogged supply routes. And beyond that loomed the Russian winter, the very same winter that had once broken Napoleon. The nightmare before Moscow. By November, German forces were once again moving toward Moscow under Operation Typhoon. They reached the outskirts of the city, and some troops claimed to see the spires of the Kremlin. Victory seemed tantalizingly close. But the Wehrmacht was exhausted. Many soldiers still wore summer uniforms. Equipment froze. Diesel turned to gel. Tanks became immobile. Weapons jammed. Supply lines, stretched over 1,000 miles, were constantly under attack by Soviet partisans. And then came the counterattack. On December 5, 1941, with temperatures plummeting below -30 degrees Celsius, the Red Army struck. Stalin had shifted elite Siberian troops, trained for winter warfare, from the Far East. Why? Because Soviet intelligence had confirmed that Japan would not attack the USSR, choosing instead to move south toward Southeast Asia and Pearl Harbor. The German lines buckled. Hundreds of thousands of troops fell back in disarray. It was the first major retreat of the war, and it shattered the myth of German invincibility. The very next day, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war, and in one of his most inexplicable decisions, Hitler declared war on America. Now, the Third Reich faced a two-front war against the world's two largest industrial powers, the USA and the USSR, the genius that never was. What made Operation Barbarossa Hitler's greatest mistake wasn't just the military failure. It was the delusion behind the strategy. He believed ideology would triumph over logistics, that his racial theories were military principles, that the Soviet Union would fall like France. But unlike France, the USSR had space, numbers, and a willingness to absorb enormous losses. Hitler dismissed the advice of experienced generals. He micromanaged the war effort, issuing contradictory orders and refusing tactical retreats that could have preserved entire armies. He also underestimated the Soviet spirit. Stalin's regime was brutal, but in the face of invasion, the Soviet people united. From factory workers to soldiers, women to children, the call was simple: fight or die. Cities like Leningrad endured 900 days of siege. Stalingrad would later become the very symbol of defiance. Barbarossa wasn't just a military blunder. It was a moral and strategic catastrophe. The aftermath, a war that couldn't be won. As 1942 dawned, Hitler launched Case Blue, another ambitious campaign to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus. But the failure before Moscow had permanently damaged German momentum. The Wehrmacht could no longer dictate the tempo of war. And then came Stalingrad, the turning point. Hitler's obsession with capturing the city that bore Stalin's name led to one of the most horrific battles in history. Over 2 million casualties, entire German armies surrounded and annihilated. From that point forward, it was a war of attrition, one Germany could not win. The Red Army, learning and evolving, began its westward push. City by city, village by village, they reclaimed their homeland and carried the war back to Berlin. Over 80% of German military deaths in World War II occurred on the Eastern Front. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union had opened a wound that would never close. Legacy. Lessons in arrogance and overreach. Had Hitler delayed the invasion by even a year, had he built stronger supply lines, ensured winter readiness, or listened to his generals, the outcome may have been different. But he was a man ruled by ego and hatred. Barbarossa destroyed not just Germany's chances of victory, but also its moral claim to civilization. The invasion was accompanied by mass murder. The Einsatzgruppen followed the Wehrmacht, executing Jews, communists, and anyone deemed undesirable. It was the beginning of the Holocaust by bullets, a prelude to the industrial genocide that would follow. The legacy of Barbarossa is one of hubris. Hitler had everything: resources, timing, power, and he squandered it, chasing ghosts of empire. Lessons from Barbarossa. Military historians still study Barbarossa not as a campaign of genius, but as a warning that wars driven by ideology, not strategy, are doomed. Hitler believed that sheer willpower could defeat geography, weather, and numbers. But the truth is simple. Ambition without discipline is just chaos. Barbarossa was lost before the first tank crossed the border because it was based on false assumptions, flawed intelligence, and pure arrogance. It reminds us, no empire, however powerful, is invincible. The war turns red. As the frozen corpses piled up outside Moscow, the illusion of Nazi invincibility shattered. Hitler had launched a war to destroy communism. Instead, he gave it a banner of resistance, a rallying cry for millions across the globe. In our next episode, we dive into the Battle of Stalingrad, where the fate of Europe would be sealed in the rubble of a city that refused to fall. From snipers on rooftops to bitter hand-to-hand combat in shattered factories, the Red Army would make its stand. And Hitler? He would double down on the very madness that began in Barbarossa. Stay tuned.